When we trust the masculine radically, he sees before it is fully made manifest what is possible. There is nothing more fortifying to a woman's character than when she is told no. A lot of the wounding patterns that we as women hold and have, if you're so empowered that you can't even look at your own honest relationship to your self-worth, then you will be extracting from him for worth, for value, to be seen.
God, truth, and love are synonyms. They're just different faces of expressing God.
Devotion is how much she gives, the art of being able to pour into a man, and the art of being able to be poured back into. The feminine doesn't give to the masculine. She gives back. Yes, financial provision is wonderful, but it's so much more than that. It's the presence of your gaze. It's the safety and the frame that you provide. It's the belief in a woman, a devotional woman. She offers her mission to his mission, and she will multiply the fruits of his labor 1,000-fold. Give her seed, she creates child. Because in order to be a good lover, you must be selfless. You must be in devotion. It's a woman who's in her pleasure, who's in her giving, who's doing it devotionally, receiving him. That's what makes a blowjob fun.
Kelsey Kazarian has a radical take on femininity. And it's radical because it's not the thing that you're hearing in pop culture around the feminine empowerment goddess movement. It includes all of the beauty of those movements, but also refines them to get down to the true essence of what is the sacred feminine and what are the devotional codes of the feminine and the devotional codes of the masculine in their pure form, regardless of which sex they embody. What are the pure codes of the feminine and the pure codes of the masculine? What are their roots? And what are the ways that they play out in the dynamics of relationship? This is one of the most important relationship podcasts I've ever recorded, so it's my absolute pleasure to introduce Kelsey Kazarian. Kelsey, so glad to have you here.
It's an absolute honor, Aubrey.
Yeah. So I want to start this podcast with a story. And this story is about one of the greatest kings that England has ever known. This king ruled for 70 years, navigated the country through a time of Cold War and crisis and decolonization, was a stable, solid, sovereign ruler. And this king's name was Queen Elizabeth. I mention that because I think there's a lot of confusion around king and queen, the roles of masculine and feminine. And I think there's a big movement towards, I want to be a queen, Queen Elizabeth. Well, that's a king. Actually, it just happens to be in the sex of a female body. But it's still actually in the masculine, role. And I think this is created because of the confusion of both the understanding of the archetype of queen and the gender associated with ruling power. The zeitgeist is very confused. And so we're here today to try and disentangle, disambiguate, and get to the purity of the source code of what the masculine really is here to stand for, what the feminine is really here to stand for, how there is obviously flexibility, because as I said, Queen Elizabeth, in my opinion, was one of the greatest kings that England has ever had. So wide open to the flexibility of switching sides and playing different roles. All that's on the table, beautiful. But let's get back to the purity of the archetypes and understand how in a relationship dynamic, particularly, masculine and feminine can work together in the highest way possible.
Yeah, I think that this is such a beautiful example of reverse polarity, and that has its moment, right? She was in reverse polarity. She was in a masculine architecture, which allowed her to drive forward and like penetrate and create massive change. And it's not to say that that's not rightful for a woman. But if we're listening to the design of our biology, that's not how a woman cultivates change, in my opinion. Now, when we start to get into these topics, it becomes a bit controversial because we have post-third wave feminism that's like, but it's our right and we're able. And like, yes, we have free will. Everyone can do whatever they desire. But I believe that there is a superpower in owning the design of our biology. And that instead of me trying to penetrate and forge ahead and be the opposite sex because of how the opposite sex has conquered, has won, has created, what if I were to understand what it is to win, to create, to conquer wouldn't be the right word for the feminine, but from my design. Mm-hmm. Why must I try to be another? And I think that a core piece to this, as we're going to go into so much today, is authenticity, right? It wouldn't be authentic for me to be in a masculine architecture, just as it might not be authentic for someone embodying their feminine to want to wear a sundress and collect eggs every day. It doesn't need to look a certain way. Mm-hmm. It's about energetic tonality, not appearance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is, so this is something that's really, I think, important because there have been historically restrictions, like legislative, cultural restrictions. I was recently watching a show where it was a big moment when the masculine gave the blessing, what you would call provision, and I want to talk about provision, to his beloved. To instead of riding side saddle, he gave her pants so she could ride a horse with her legs spread open like a real hussy, back in the 15th century, right? But like, yeah, duh. Like, right. Of course, if you're riding a fucking horse, put on some pants. You're supposed to ride them forward, not ride them sideways. That's the most ridiculous way to ride a horse. Like there was moments in time, and like, oh, women shouldn't vote or women can't do. All right, yeah, we gather that. Like, understood. Now let's return back though also and gather up all of the beauty of that kind of pre-tragic understanding of masculine and feminine. Now that we've moved into the tragic where it's like, all right, everybody can do everything, and say like, okay, yeah, that's true. And now what is the best way in this kind of post-tragic? What's this best way that we can actually look at the masculine and feminine archetypes for those who want to embody those archetypes regardless of the sex that they're in?
Right. And the thing about the post-third wave feminism is that it wasn't a fight for rights. Like, obviously, yes, women should vote and have a bank account and be able to ride the horse whatever way they want, wearing whatever sort of clothing they want. But it was a reactionary response to perceived oppression, which I think the oppression was a mechanism actually of protecting that which is sacred within the feminine, which is her radiance. I think that it was not like, oh, and this is so controversial, but that it's not like, oh, you're too dumb, woman, you shouldn't vote. It's like, oh, let's like keep the woman like in a place where she's in her radiance, beauty, and joy, and maybe doesn't need to over-operate in the topside world. Now, we've evolved modernly, right? We also have penicillin and other modern evolutions that are great. Right. Like, we've evolved as a culture, and that's beautiful. And I think that it's so important, but in third wave feminism, it was like, I always imagine it like the woman in the early 2000s or 90s, like on her flip phone, in her suit, like walking down Wall Street, like stepping on a man with her stiletto, like in this, like, I'm like almost this, I have a bigger dick than you. And let me show you. And let me punish you for hundreds of years of perceived oppression, of not having rights, of not being able, by being better than you, by competing with you. Mm-hmm. And I think that within that, anything that's reactionary Anything that's trying to cultivate a power over power under dynamic, I think is rooted in distortion.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to fuck around with distortion.
Yeah. That's it. That's the mission, right? Is like clear all the distortion from the field. And I think men, we do have to take accountability for the shadow masculine that wasn't protecting the feminine's radiance. It was actually looking to squash the feminine radiance, to actually keep her from shining, because that shining and that radiance of the goddess is so powerful. And the capabilities of like, what were the witch hunts all about?
Right.
Right? Like if they had no power, if there was nothing to be afraid of, you don't go hunting them. They were afraid of something. And they were afraid because there is genuine actual power in the feminine if it actually moves through into this place where they're receiving that information from the cosmos and can actually weave it in a unique way and birth life, birth magic into the world. There was a lot of shadow masculine that occurred. So the response is understood. And I think men have to realize like, okay, like we got to take some responsibility for the fact that, yeah, we did some collectively as the masculine, we did some fucked up things in the past. However, we're in a different world now. And the reaction, although you can say like, I understand it, it's time now for that to actually soften and unravel so that people can be happy in a relationship dynamic and we can move forward from here without playing these seesaw, teeter-totter games, compensating for something that happened in the past that isn't actually viable and happening now.
Well, and it's like the best example is romantic partnership. Because could you imagine if your partner was always bringing up that one time when you were 23, when you flirted with that girl at a bar and was like, that time, and that deserves me to throw my coffee in your face, that would be insane. And that's what we are doing. And it's a holding on to a wound. That's the collective feminine is holding on to a wound. And what that has cultivated is a culture where men are afraid to go up to a woman in a bar and hit on her and be like, you're beautiful. Can I take you to dinner? Because he's going to seem predatory. Because like men are afraid to be in their masculinity and have a little bit of hunting in the game of courtship. Because he will be shamed, he will be seen as predatory, he will be condemned, and a woman will be like, ew, you're creepy or you're unsafe as a result. And it's like a shaming masculinity as a punishment for the ills of men hundreds of years ago, who also like that wounding. Yes, it's a fear of the mystery. We have to think back to archaic times where women all of a sudden are growing a child and men have no idea that it's their seed that got them there. And they're just like, you create life. I have no idea how anything works within you. You are the mystery. Are you part God? Are you part magic? Women have intuition. And with the onset of, and the popularization of Christianity, it's like, oh, anything that we don't understand, we have to condemn. And that is the mystery. But I have compassion for this aspect of the masculine and that iteration of the masculine because there was no female architecture of God. There was men had to move through the world with what I call the absent mother architecture. For us women, we had the tyrannical, patriarchal, white man in the sky condemning you for touching yourself. But for women or for men had to move through the world without any divine feminine architecture. And I use that phrase gently because I'm actually talking about the divine feminine. I particularly prefer, when talking about women, referring to women as devotional feminine. Because I am living in devotion. I'm not claiming myself as divine. Of course, we all are fractals of God. We all have divine running through us. But I am living my life in devotion to the Godhead, to the ineffable expression of life and creation. And also in reverence for my partnerships, for my friends, for my service, for all of it. I'm not claiming myself as divine. In that divine feminine architecture, the absent mother, men, of course, had a resentment for the feminine bearing mystery, bearing these undeniably magical qualities that they couldn't understand because he had no role model or example of of like a mother architecture that was divine. Whereas we look at let's look at like ancient Mesopotamian culture, right? Like Sumerian, the times of Inanna or Ishtar or Astarte. They had reverence for the feminine and for women and for the mystery that they were because they had mythological and religious, spiritual representation of that architecture. And so it's like, yeah, we can get angry at men all we want, but are we actually using our brains and looking at things anthropomorphically as to how culture was cultivated? Because it's really easy to blame, but we have to look at culture. And also where men, and I know I'm just on one right now, but where men have been conditioned to not be in relationship with their emotionality. And women are these emotional beings. So of course they resent or don't understand something that they've been punished by society to express. And so, okay, it's easy to point the finger of blame, but that's not the pathway. The pathway is understanding forgiveness and compassion for what culture has done, for like the anthropology of humanity, and for looking at things just with a little bit of a higher level intelligence of that wasn't what you wanted to do. That was your conditioning.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a few poems that I want to read that I think touch on some of these subjects and can maybe be launching points for us ultimately then to get to. I really want to dive deeper into, the highest fruition of the feminine and masculine in a relationship and like how we can bring about the best in each other and how important this model is. But there's a couple poems. I'm going to go to the library here. I'm going to grab these and we'll read them and jump off from there. All right, so the first poem that I want to read is my way of acknowledging where the sacred masculine has failed in the past. And actually, in that, point towards where the sacred masculine can step up and actually fulfill what our archetypal destiny, the highest potential that we have is. And the poem is called Apologies from the Father, from my new book, Love to the Seventh Power. My magical daughter, not long ago my lost sons came for the priestesses with ropes and torch fire, lighting with shadow the unholy pyre after they redacted the feminine from the origin story. I'm so sorry. My beautiful daughter, even now you are trafficked, commodified and tricked, raped and cajoled, while predators are paroled. What they have stolen can never be returned. Once more you are burned. I'm so sorry. My beloved daughter, I weep for you. With the identical tears I wept for my son, when his blood-wet streams flowed down empire's crossed beams. There is no measure in heaven for our cosmic loss. I'm so sorry. My powerful daughter, I'm sending the angels, the warriors and star kings. I'm waking the dragons, the merlins and fae to fight at your side, to kneel and be knighted, so you may rise, goddess, rise. I'm so sorry it's taken us so long.
It's fucking gorgeous, Aubrey.
Thank you. Yeah, that is, I think, something that's important to share is like, hey, to all the women, to all the goddesses, like, on behalf of all the masculine, like, I'm sorry. And now it's different. Now, like, all the magic, all the power, all the force, all the protection will die for you, will fight for you. It's the reason. What else is there? What else gives us purpose? but the actual reverence and beauty and purity of the goddess. And so, when we step into a world where the goddess is saying like, I don't need you, men. We can do everything you can do. You're actually just a nuisance, like, then men are just like, all right, what the fuck am I here for then? Play Scrabble? Like, well, I don't know. What do you want me to do?
It's like protection and provision. And we spoke on to this a little bit last night of like men stepping into a role of protection and provision of the feminine. But if a woman's like, oh, no, I don't want that. I don't need that. I'm fine. Then what? He's making his money to engage in the never endless, like consumeristic culture, like trying to feel safe himself. There's like an inspiration and a drive, not that provision is only monetary. Provision is actually so much greater. Masculine provision, and we can talk more about what that means as a whole.
Let's go deep into the word provision, because I think even the word itself is encoded with an understanding that has been one of the most profound reasons. It's one of the reasons why I wanted so desperately to have you on this podcast, because even the languaging of provision and understanding the masculine's role in provision, whether you're talking about Father God provision, or you're talking about, the masculine relationship provision and protection, as like the highest articulation of what the masculine can offer. It's like super, super important.
Yeah. And when we break down the etymology of the word provision, it's pro and vision. And it's for the masculine to be able to pro-vision, to see what comes before, to see what comes, plan, and create accordingly. Embedded within it is a foresight. Embedded within it is the ability to, yes, provide, but see and deliver. And there's like the masculine visionary aspect that gets amplified in there. It's like the provision may be for him to say, we're going to go move across the country. And she might be like, well, our entire life is here and that feels scary. But when we trust the masculine, and we're going to talk about some controversial aspects of this here in a moment, when we trust the masculine radically, they move across the country. He sees what comes before. He sees before it is fully made manifest what is possible. And within that, and this is also honoring the masculine site, which doesn't always get talked about because we honor the oracle so much.
Yeah, well, that's talking about pro. That's also the first three letters of prophet. And to talk to Father Sean O'Leary, the mystic Catholic, he says a prophet is someone who sees a possible future and then navigates with will and strength and courage towards that possible future. So if it's moving across the country, it's that way. He referred to Robert F. Kennedy Jr. as a prophet because he said, Bobby saw the possibility for the changes that we could make in the world, and then he moved in accordance with that to manifest that into action. So the oracle is kind of like a passive seer, but a prophet has the thrust of the masculine to actually not only see, but actually move towards that. Every entrepreneur that's been successful, it's been a prophetic moment. Like I prophesized on it being successful. And then I went and took the steps and the sleepless nights and the countless, struggles over 10 years to bring all the pieces together to bring that to life, which then now provides for all of those people I love and everybody who's been around. But it was the vision that I took action upon that created the ability to provide.
Exactly. And it doesn't always make sense in the moment. And this teaching, not in her direct verbiage, but comes through from one of my teachers, Jillian Ponthier, of Feminine Eros, and she is an incredible woman. And within that, she has this teaching that's like, if he's a good man, if he is a man who walks in integrity, who's in alignment with his mission, like if he's a good man who you trust, whatever he does, wherever he directs you, it is provision. whether it's favorable to your ego or not. So when he calls you out, calls you forward, when he doesn't have time to rub your feet like he said he would, when he's not able to be present for a certain conversation process that you want to have, it's always provision if the man is a good man. And there's always an invitation for our own growth and development. Now, if he's rooted in distortion, fallen masculine architecture, ego distortion, that's not always going to be true. And so we as women also have to use our discernment. But if he is a man who is devoted to truth, if he's not available for that conversation, odds are your argument or your emotions need to be digested a little bit more within yourself before it's brought to him. It is God will always work through the good men in our lives. Partner, brother, lover, friend, whatever it may be. God will always work through the good men in our lives, and that's honoring the provision of the masculine, their sight, their ability to create ordained outcomes, prophecy, bring prophecy to form. But because of the historical mistrust between the masculine and feminine, that's really hard for a woman to honor.
Yeah.
And that's where we bring in the essence of devotion. Because it is only a woman who is devoted to, and I will say God, insert whatever word resonates for you here. It is only a woman who is in devotion to God first, and then her man, that can honor the provision of his yes and his fucking holy erotic no. Because there is nothing more fortifying to a woman's character than when she is told no. That allows her to look at herself, that allows her to grow and evolve and self-source and become the best version of herself possible. If she was constantly told yes, would that actually cultivate the caliber of character that we would want to see in the world? If she's like, I have to have a process with you about something, and he's like, drop all of my topside world mission work, whatever you need. No, that's not honoring the kingdom building and that which he's creating in order to provide and protect, which is his language of devotion. And our language of devotion is service. And that our being the feminine. And that can look like love. That can look like acts of kindness. That can look like just being sanctuary. There's actually so many different love languages of devotion. I'm currently in the process of writing a piece on this because there's so many different expressions of devotion. It's not just, back rubs and blowjobs. It's so much more than that. It's more so the way that we are an open sanctuary for the masculine to come after engaging with the topside world, after having to deal with the stresses, to be this sanctuary and this offering of radiance. And you can be in your radiance, in your sweatpants and a messy bun on top of your head. It's the expression of your heart and soul, not just your beauty. It's the openness. And it's also this, I will stand by your side in all that you do. I will be your advocate. I will support you. I will be your ear. I will be your soft place to rest your head. I will be with you through all of it, body, mind, and soul.
We all have this innate sense that love is the most powerful force in the universe and in our own lives. And yet we only have one word for it. Well, the ancient Greeks had 7. Eros was erotic love. Mania, that obsessive love. Pragma, that rational love. Storge, that parental love. Philia, the brotherly love. Philautia, self-love. And agape, universal love. And each of these tones of love have their own characteristics. And I ultimately realized that all of the poetry that was pouring out of my heart came from love, But it was through these different fractals, mediated by these different types of love, that my poetry was actually emerging. So all of that came together in my new book, Love to the Seventh Power. All poetry comes from love. There's wildly erotic poems. There's fierce protective poems. There's divine, fatherly, loving poems to the son that I'm going to have. There are poems with the fierceness of a warrior who is standing for what is good. This is a snapshot into the inner sanctum of my own heart. Everything that I truly feel and have felt, all of the heartaches, all of the triumphs, all of those dark, low moments, all of those vulnerable confessions, all of it is contained and wrapped in verse in this new book. So check it out. You can go to chakaruna.com, chakaruna.com. We have some beautiful golden bookmarks there and signed copies of the book. And also, it's available on Amazon. We have an amazing audiobook recording, and you can buy the book on Amazon there as well, and also an ebook. So for those of you who haven't gotten it already, I hope you guys enjoy my book, Love to the Seventh Power. All poetry comes from love. If you look at, this kind of contemporary postmodern moment that we're in, and the kind of what I would call the quote woke culture influence of this, you see a lot of depictions in stories that are being, popularized right now, where the masculine is almost universally some kind of bumbling idiot. So some kind of has lost the prophetic sight, has lost any reason to trust, and it's only the women that make sense in the films. Like all the men are just kind of bumbling, lost idiots, and it's the women that make sense. And then there's all these things like the future is feminine, like men are a bunch of bumbling idiots who can't get out of their own way, and it's only us women who can see. And there's a kernel of truth in that, because if the masculine is unable to actually listen and actually feel the field. So if that feminine capacity within the masculine has been damaged or shut off or uncultivated, and all they're hearing and seeing is their own service to self-oriented, language and programming, of course, the man's going to be a bumbling idiot, and it's going to guide the kingdom and steer the ship towards disaster. But this overcharacterization of all men being like that, by the very nature of being a man, is absurd. It's absurd. It's like, yes, there is that example. And it was interesting. I recently watched Lion King 2, which is basically the origin story of Mufasa. And it started off and I was like, oh shit, here we go. Disney being woke again, because basically there was the king of the pride where Mufasa was kind of adopted into. And the king was the archetype of that bumbling idiot, selfish, lazy, and the women in the pride of lions were the ones who had the sight. When Mufasa then is banished from the men and stays with the women and learns the ability to see and feel and smell, but also it's part of the process of him becoming the good king. So there is an aspect of the necessity for the masculine to have that listening. So where I was just speaking about the tree of life yesterday, and there's one of the illuminations of Chesed, which is the penetrative force, the phallus of the masculine. Well, any good lover, the phallus is not just a rock hard, unfeeling piece of thing. It's feeling inside the yoni with every thrust. It's feeling the feminine every time they're thrusting. It's the same with the speaker. Every word that you say, you're listening to what's happening. Every action you're making, you're listening to how the goddess writ large is receiving your thrust, and you're paying attention. And so it is necessary for the masculine to cultivate feminine aspects, but let us not get confused and say that, this is because they have, male genitalia, they're incapable of actually being what a man is intended to be. It's all nonsense.
Well, and is that not a part of the natural initiatory rite of boy becoming man, of prince or knight becoming king? right? Alison Armstrong has a book. I can't remember the name right now, but we'll get it, where she talks about the stages of masculinity. I'm sure that you're familiar with Alison Armstrong, right? And that, like, you know, there's like knight, prince, you know, it goes all the way up to king. And that actually most men don't come into their kingship until they're in their like 50s, 60s, until they're older. But we have every like modern woman being like, I need a king, especially spiritual women, New Age women. Like, I need a king. No man is going to have it all figured out. And there will be moments where he's a bumbling idiot. There will be moments where he's 40 days, 40 nights in the desert. There will be moments where he needs to go on a quest to grow into the iteration of who he needs to be in order to eventually, as it is rightful, become a king. And in those initiations of kingship, he attunes to his empathy. He attunes to his emotional body. And that's like, I think that the journey of becoming a man, and to a certain degree, I can only imagine because I am a woman, is a journey just like we women have in becoming a woman, of walking in union with God. And when you come into union with God, with this divine ineffable force, you have to know yourself in all polarities. You are being fucked and fucking simultaneously, right? You are receiving and penetrating. And I think that one of the issues within modernism is that we live in either a godless world or a world with this archaic, tyrannical father iteration of God.
Right.
And so how can we actually understand what it is to come into relational union if we are not walking in union with creation itself, right? If we're disconnected from that. And the role of the devotional woman in a man's initiatory process of becoming a man, of humbling himself before God, of walking in union, is not to be like, I'm an oracle and I need to show you who you are, and I need to like reveal to you all these blind spots that you have. There may be a rightful moment or two where it is necessary to present him something that he may not see. But your job is not to shape or change him. Your job is to love him. And that is the essence of devotion, both for men and women, is to love someone for 100% who they be, without trying to morph them, change them into who your ego wants or what you think would make them a better person. To love them, flaws and all. I was talking this morning about what got me into this work. And that's a longer story, but a piece of it was loving a deeply imperfect man and choosing him, flaws and all, and giving him my entire heart and showing up even though there was ego on board and, you know, whatever comes up with every single fucking human, as if I don't have ego too, right? But loving a imperfect, mortal man, choosing him, not trying to make him into this perfect version, not trying to make him into a king, accepting him who he was and choosing to be in devotion to that. And through that, through loving someone perfectly imperfect without trying to change them, they will naturally become the best versions of themselves.
Well, they'll become what is true.
Exactly.
They'll become what is true, which is, that's the invaluable part, because you'll get to see what is truly there. If you're constantly in this devouring mother, micromanaging, controlling, you're going to be able to coerce somebody into some version that is palatable for you. But meanwhile, your pussy is dry as the Sahara Desert. And you're like, this is not what I'm looking for. And then somebody else who doesn't seem to need that, is you're going to always be more appealing on the other side. But by that act of devotion, you're going to see what this person is really made of. And then at that point, there's going to come out that point of discretion. Like, do I want to continue my path of devotion with this man? Do I see that he is actually devoted to becoming this type of man, and through my devotion, it will call him forward? Or is this not my charge, not my path, not my way? For you with this man, there was a deep sadhana, a spiritual practice for you to devote entirely, but obviously you're not with him anymore. So I'm surmising that there was a moment of discretion where you were like, I've given you everything, and this is not yielding the result into something that is actually going to be the fruitful partnership. I'm going to offer my gifts somewhere else, because it is the most powerful gift in the world. Like when I receive devotion from my partners, it calls forward the very, very best of me, like nothing else could. Whereas someone's like, challenging or questioning or doing all that, like there's a place for that, as you said, but that doesn't call me forward in any way. From the feminine, what I really need is like, I trust you. And I trust you to lead us, to protect me, to provide for me. I trust your vision. I trust your sight, and I'm with you 100%. And then it's like, shit, I got to do this, because like I am getting full devotion. So I have someone who needs me, and I have to show up based on that need. But let's talk about that moment of discretion and discernment. So, because, some women listening to this might be like, well, I've done that before and it's got me burned, and this man is, turned out to be a piece of shit. And unfortunately, there are some men that are like that. They're just, the cracks are revealed.
To be a devotional woman and to offer your devotion is a initiatory rite for the masculine. And there will be some quests that he will go on as a result of your devotion, where he will rise into his kingship. But there will be times where he has to go to war with his own dragons, and he can't slay him. And I think that for the woman listening, you have to be tuned to truth. And a man may fail and fail and fail again, and then rise and finally slay that dragon. But you can only stay as long as it is in your truth to be able to stay through those initiatory rites. But I think that every woman, and probably every man listening to this, has had that moment where they're loved so completely that they almost feel unworthy and try to self-sabotage it a little bit, try to blow it up. They're like, and can we not have compassion for that moment? And so in my case, it came down to I am so committed to my values and to what I desire of this life. And over time, as my devotion deepened, our values shifted. We were on different, to use the dragon metaphor again, we were on different dragons. He was chasing something different that wasn't in integrity with what I was chasing. I was on a God and service and love mission. And his mission at that moment was something different. And I honor that and I revere that. And that's beautiful, and bless him on his way. He's an amazing man. It's just not for me, because I believe that the initiations of devotion should bring us closer to God, to love, to family, to cultivating the next generation, to impact service, right? That's what it is about having children. It's cultivating the next generation birthed from love, true union, and of devotion. And it's a fine line between knowing when a man is like still in the process of slaying a dragon and he will overcome it, versus, if he falls. And there are a lot of men, it's easier in modern culture to fall to distortion, to be lost in porn addiction, lack of satiation, trying to fill the, swipe right culture where there's always something better, hotter, tighter ass on the other side. But to where he might not be challenged in his ego, in the way that he is simply by her presence and her love and her unwavering faith in him. Again, for the women listening, this is not you trying to morph him and change him into what you think a king is. This is just fucking loving him and watching the man that God has anointed him to be, not your ego.
Yeah. It seems like this is the process of alchemical calcination, the burning away of impurities, and it happens on both sides. And for me, my moments of discretion and in the relationships that I've severed from former lovers is when I know that I've provided full provision, full protection, which is my act of devotion, and it's not received and returned with the full devotion. There's this sense of, okay, the system is broken and this is no longer tenable for me because I've given you everything, and and I wouldn't have had the language for it, but what I was really craving in return is full devotion. I've fulfilled my role 100%. And what is being returned time and time again, many chances, many different efforts, it's not being returned as devotion. It's not actually being devoted to me in the same way that I've been devoted to you. And I think it's the same, I can imagine the same vice versa. If a woman gives full devotion and she's not getting full provision, full protection, full, that form, which is a different form of devotion, but if she's not getting that full receipt of that, if either side if that doesn't generate this kind of hieros gamos lock of full reciprocity that kind of comes, at a certain point you go, okay, well, there's something here that's blocking this process and it's just simply not working.
And it's a fine line between unplugging from the transactional nature of you must make me a meal and I buy the groceries, get this transactional energetic of it. But I think that experience, I can imagine that experience that you had is it's never enough, because a woman giving her devotion can be as simple as being in her joy body and just loving you. And so if you're pouring in, and it's simply never enough, and she's right. In this tonality, that's not inspiring for you. And I want to specify for the audience, because so many men listening are going to be in different stages of their kingdom building. Yes, financial provision is wonderful, but it's so much more than that. It's the presence of your gaze. It's the safety and the frame that you provide. It's the belief in a woman. It's the guidance. It's the leadership. That is all provision, as much as the house and the car and the comfort. There are so many ways to provide, no matter what stage of your kingdom you're in. And it is in the provision of her, be it the guidance, the care, the money in the bank account, whatever it may be, it is in the provision of her that she is protected from having to fight on the front lines of her own life. She has a warrior king in front of her, right? Guiding her this direction, babe, that direction. He's I see, the battlefield scenes in the movies that we love where he's slaying the path ahead and guiding that oracle down. She's just holding up her skirt and mucking through the mud. It's not to say that she won't have her own battles, but there is someone there in defense, in leadership, in guidance, in protection of her. And the application of that to modernism is for each human to take into their own system and digest it as they will for their life. But it is the false pretense of the independent, strong woman that doesn't need that aspect of provision, that doesn't need that protection. Yes, we do.
Or just takes it for granted as if it's nothing. And not actually seeing and feeling you don't know how hard it is to bear the weight that would, and I write about this in another one of my poems, the weight that I bear would crush tender bones. You have no idea. Like, you have no idea. And so when it comes time for me to actually allow the weight to fall off and step into sanctuary, I need to step into sanctuary. I can't step into your, emotional chaos in this moment that after I've been dealing with, as Elon Musk said, like, being a CEO is one of the hardest positions in the world because you're dealing with every problem that nobody else can solve all day. You're solving the most complicated problems all day. So if you go back into your partnership then, and you're solving every trivial problem about a hairdresser or about some other thing, and you're just like, what the fuck? I'm weary. I'm worn the fuck out. I need to step into the sanctuary. And it doesn't mean that if you have a problem that you can't solve, of course, I'm there for you. I'm going to handle it and take care of it. But at the end of the day, I'm called upon when I'm really needed in the most way. And it reminds me actually of this movie I know we've both seen called Anora.
I haven't seen it.
Oh, you haven't seen it? Oh, you got to see it.
Tonight.
Yeah, you got to see it. But ultimately, it's a story, and I won't spoil it for everybody, but it's the story of a dancer who meets this young oligarch who then, and she's just on the grind, and it's a tough, and she's a good woman, and she's in a tough spot, and she's doing her best. And then he comes in as the prince that can liberate her from the struggles and give her provision for a life beyond struggle and beyond the self-sacrifice of her her real treasure, her sexual essence that she's having to commodify just to make ends meet. And it turns out, and she gives him that devotion, even if he's playing fucking video games or whatever, she's like, I got you, whatever you need, I got you. And what I'm receiving from you is the provision for a different life. And she's in the receipt of that provision and in the devotion. And then when it comes time for him to protect her, he runs away. And she's like, what the fuck? Ultimately. And then there's another character in there who's not the character you would expect, but that is actually there with provision, actually in every small step, providing, protecting. And it's this story of this kind of prince who's ultimately the false king, this kind of prince that can't redeem. When it really comes down to it, he's not made of the stuff, the melek, as they would say in the kind of language of our roots, the melek, the kingship. He's not made of that stuff. So the provision was just not really real, and it didn't go all the way through. Whereas, seemingly her devotion did. And so that was the fracture, and it's this kind of tragic moment of that fracture.
Well, and, in this, that movie is a beautiful example because it's not to say that he can't hold space for the drama with the hairdresser, but is she attuned for if that's actually in reverence and respect for what he's moved through? Is that an attuned ask, right? One of my teachers says, make an appointment with him if it's an emotionally heavy thing. Honor where he's at. If he comes home from the battlefield to a battlefield. And women oftentimes feminize their men by treating them like their girlfriend. Your man can absolutely be your best friend, but you're not going to gab about what Christy said to Susan, right? And the little dramas and all these other micro-emotional battles. It's what is it to actually be in the art of receiving your man? But then if in that clutch moment where she does fall to her knees in need, or she tries to schedule an appointment with him to process something, she needs his protection. If he's like, well, your bills are paid, I'm just not even gonna fuck with this. No.
Mm-hmm.
Then he's also not showing up in reciprocity.
Right.
He's then not showing up in devotion because provision is not enough. It's protection, but also a man's protection is in his no. I have started arguments in the middle of the kitchen at exactly the wrong time, right after my partner at the time was coming out of a meeting, and he's like, I'm not having this conversation with you right now. That was protection for us both and for our union. That no was holy and sacred and profound, and allowed me to have to humble my how dare you, these are my feelings, and be with, this is not the rightful moment. And that is the provision. That is his sight. This is not the moment. He's not resourced. It's going to end in a screaming match, not in a productive, mature, conflict resolution. And can we also honor a man's no as provision, as protection? And can we, as the feminine, just move with a little bit more grace, awareness, access our vast expanse of intuitive wisdom, of oracular power, to read when it is the best moment to bring things? And also, we want to go off on our high horse about consent. Can we ask him for consent to bring him something that is heavy or hard or challenging? And honor his free will and honor his capacity. And this is the essence of devotion. It's honor, it's love. When I spell it out, I'm just like, how is it that hard? But it's our conditioning. It's our conditioning as women in modernism to actually not honor our men as humans with emotions and feelings, as this false pretense of, I'm an empowered woman and you must deal with every wave that comes as it comes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And, and there will be those moments, in a king. A king understands the priority of the situation, and the partnership is always in the highest priority of the field of value. But there are certain things in that field of value that are actually will occasionally supersede, what that moment is, depending upon the gravity of the situation. Now, you just get in a car crash, right? There's no meeting, there's no podcast, there's no speech, there's no anything else. There's something else that you're actually called to. And that's what a king will always respond. Everything else can move. I'm the king. I'll adjust the whole kingdom to attend to this. But it's also trusting that there's a whole field of value there, and trusting that your king will make that decision. There's a story that was passed down to me from my grandmother about my grandfather, Aubrey. And this was back in the time where they didn't have cell phones. And my grandfather, Aubrey, has been preparing for this. He was a teacher, and he had a huge speech that he was going to give in this, kind of preeminent university. And it was a big moment for his career. And they were in a kind of small farmhouse, and didn't have a car. He took the only car that they had, and they obviously didn't have phones, and the things weren't all set up. And my uncle Craig had broken his arm badly, and he was he needed to go to the hospital, and they didn't have the ability to call an ambulance, walk to a neighbor, whatever. So my grandma just sat down in prayer and meditation and just said, "Aubrey, come home. Aubrey, come home." Now he's driving. He's an hour away driving already to this university for this most important moment of his career, his life. And she just goes, "Aubrey, come home. Aubrey, come home. Aubrey, come home." And for whatever reason, it worked, through the great mystery and the power of this interconnected field we're in. Aubrey received that message without knowing exactly what it was or how it was, and just I have to go home. Turned around his car and showed back up at the house, and then ultimately found his son needed to go to the hospital, right? But he was listening in a way and actually acting in kingship, knowing, and my grandma Bonnie was also knowing she wouldn't go into that oracular prayer, into that mystical power to call him if it wasn't the most important thing. If she was just having a bad day and just wanted someone to vent to or whatever, that was not the moment for that, but it was something that was actually essential, and he was able to shift something. And I will of course not share the personal details of this story, but you recently had an experience where you really needed somebody, and they're I don't have time for that.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have time for that shit. Well, that's not going to work. Either. The king has to be fully available to provide and protect when that moment comes. And also the feminine has to know and have the discretion about when is the time? When is that time where it's actually like, I really need you to show up?
And, a lot when we talk about devotional femininity, we have to look at a lot of the wounds that play out, because there's like fawning, there's people pleasing, and there's need diminishing. And it becomes very easy when you have this otherworldly and erotic pulse to serve the man that you love, to need diminish. And a woman who was in her wounding pattern, if she was in Bonnie's shoes, might have been like, oh no, it's so big for his career. I'll just sit here with my child, broken arm, needing to go to the hospital, and we'll just wait. And it's not a need. And his mission is way more important. But to be able to own and acknowledge your needs so that you can call him into the most impeccable leadership for the kingdom, into the best version of himself, and into that protection and provision is so important. But again, in modernism, we have women like blowing out the fact that he didn't put the milk back in the right place in the fridge as the need, to prove a point, to play a power game, to emasculate him, to create some sort of little micro battle that she needs to win. And that's where we see that reverse polarity again, like we started with Queen Elizabeth, right?
Mm-hmm.
That King Elizabeth, as you said, that reverse polarity of having to win a battle against your man for every tiny thing. Where the milk fucking goes isn't a need. The fact that he didn't put down the toilet seat isn't a need. It might be a preference. It's not a need. And if you are being provided for and protected, in, again, whatever form that may take, material or not, oftentimes spiritually. If you are being provided for and protected, why are you cultivating tiny battles out of nothing and dishonoring all the battles that he's going to be able to show up for you in those ways?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, when competition exists at a fundamental level in a relationship, it undermines everything. Like there needs to be this radical celebration of vive la différence. Like we're different and we're providing different things. And to see the different levels of provision that come mutually across both sides and to have the right reciprocity of that, that's what allows union to really flourish, to be met with that. And either side can lead in that and can kind of push the ball forward. Wild provision. Like I've got you so taken care of in every way. I'm shielding and protecting you from every potential place you might fall. I'm supporting you, guiding you. Like I got you 100%. So that can come from the masculine, or the feminine. It could come from like, I am like absolutely unequivocally devoted to you in this moment. And it can kind of push the game towards that greater and greater union. So it's not about, trying to measure up to where you are. Like either side, I feel like can lead the dance in a way, and really, but then it just has to be received, and then has to evoke the proper response. But the proper response without the frameworks and the constructs and the ideas that are there, people may not know how to do that. So in a lot of former relationships, my provision was so profound that they had to look away from it. They had to like look away from the provision, because if they actually looked at it, they didn't feel worthy to be able to devote, and that their devotion would be enough. But it would have always been enough. I chose them. It would have always been enough if they were really willing to devote at the same level that I was offering provision. It would have been enough. Now, I'm glad the way things turned out. I couldn't possibly be more happy than where I am right now. So it's all perfect. But nonetheless, it could have worked with anybody. But ultimately, I would have been needed to. I was leading a dance of providing this inordinate, unbelievable, gracious provision. And so what I would have needed to feel fulfilled was a level of devotion that actually rose to that level. And it can work the other way. And like devotion comes in at a level that's beyond even the provision, even if it's temporarily beyond the provision, then it's like, fuck, let me get my shit together and like, let me show you why I deserve this level of devotion, why I deserve this level of eros and dazzlement and beauty. Like, it calls me forward. So I think we can each call each other forward, not with the critical, nagging side of things. Of course, yes, you may need to call out certain things that exist, but fundamentally, if the pieces are in the right place, you'll call forward by your radical act of devotion in the different forms that they're able to be provided.
And there's like, in the example that you used where the women had to turn away from the provision, it's a lack of receptivity, the ability to receive. We can use the analogy of sex, right? If you're like clenching and holding and unable to receive, you're never going to be able to receive a man's cock and the immensity of pleasure that can bring. And I always say, like, a woman's orgasm is 90% her job, because it's how much she can receive and surrender. And that is a feminine art in and of itself. Now, a lot of times when we talk about devotional femininity, there's this like, oh, so I have to be this like passive, feminine, like soft, quiet flower, like wallflower of a woman in order to be in my devotion. The most devotional women that I know are forces, but they are masters at receptivity. They are masters at softening and receiving the provision of both God and their man. And I have this one post that's like, I'm not a boss babe or a trad wife. I'm a third mystical thing. Mm-hmm. Because it's like, we have the like hyper independent woman who's like, I don't need no man. No, I'm not receiving. Like, even if you are giving, I'm going to block it. And I'm going to think of all the other ways that you're not enough and not focus on what I am receiving, not be able to receive. Or we have the trad wife that's like, all I am is a receptacle for all of these things that you're giving. And my only mission in life, and maybe this is some woman's mission and that's beautiful, but is to like milk the cow and, wear the peasant dress and push out babies. And like all those things are beautiful. If that is your truth, like, do you. Authenticity is the only thing that matters. But my work particularly is for a woman that doesn't fit in either of those boxes. Doesn't mean that a devotional woman won't have a mission or won't want to milk a cow or have babies. Devotion is how much she gives, the art of being able to pour into a man, and the art of being able to be poured back into. Mm-hmm. We do not need to paint ourselves in some sort of box or be less or follow like a, 24/7 dynamic of dominance and submission if that's not your erotic joy, right? It's something so much greater, something almost spiritual in the way that we receive and in the way that we offer. My teacher, Jillian, she has this quote that the feminine doesn't give to the masculine. She gives back. And I love that. Because it's all that she's offering, be it the back massage and the blowjob, or the warm hug, or the sweet embracing gaze, or the giggle to his joke that might have been mid as fuck, but she just loves him, right? That in and of itself is a giving back for the kingdom that he has created for her. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, you see, I can see examples of this on both sides. I can call forward in my mind a truly devotional woman who's not being honored by the king in the way that the king is receiving the depth of that devotion and then honoring her with the provision that is worthy of that. And I see the other way where the woman is not honoring the provision that the man is ultimately offering. And, you see these discrepancies, and you can really look at from this frame, you can really kind of understand like where the relationship has room to grow. It's really about receiving, Like, are you really receiving or are you looking away? You know, and in the Kabbalist lineage, you know, looking away. So panim el panim is face to face with God. And really, as all of us are the immanence, what is really now emanating and true and real in this moment of the transcendent God, like we are the immanence of that. So the immanence of the devotion, if you're looking face to face in it, you have to receive that. And then that will naturally compel something based on these laws of the universe. The Quechua word, aini, the reciprocity will naturally flow. Or you look away. And that's Sitra Akra, and that's the turning of the face. So Sitra Akra means the other side. And in the other side, it's like the upside down world because the energy stops flowing and then things start to corrupt and fall apart. And I think it's just kind of calling out and really understanding like, okay, am I being received? Am I fully being received? And if you are fully being received, then it will call forward that thing. You know, and it's so much about both sides being receptive, like the chalice being receptive to the thrust of the sword and the sword being receptive to actually the receiving of the thrust, you know, and like the appreciation of that thrust. And like when both of those are in alignment, you get this term sacred union. That is the Hieros Gamos. That's what everybody is looking for. But without these frames, you don't understand it. You're caught in these petty, you know, power struggles and these little kind of minutia that are not there. But I think it all stems from a priori the turning of the face, that Sitra Akra moment where you're not really receiving the devotion that's being provided.
It reminds me of the story in the Old Testament around Lot's wife. Right, where they're escaping Sodom and Gomorrah and God says, do not turn back. And they're leaving and everything's in destruction. And Lot's wife disobeys God and Lot and turns back and turns into a pillar of salt.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the thing about sacred union. Yes, everyone wants it. This is a bold statement. You cannot fucking have it if you do not trust God and obey God and trust the masculine, your man, and obey him.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't mean that you don't have rights. Like, I know that that's hard for some people to hear, like what it means to obey him, but it's to trust his provision. In that example, Lot is guiding his wife literally out of nuclear destruction. And she doesn't follow his provision or God's provision, turns back, turns into a pillar of salt. We can see that as turning into bitterness, right? Mm-hmm. Looking back, and there's so many different interpretations and iterations of it. I love the mythopoetic stories throughout time, but this, if you can't heal your wounding with the masculine that will allow you to see that he is fucking tracking you, he is taking care of you, he is providing for you, or believe that it's possible to have those things and step out of a relationship with a man that is unable to do that, you're not going to have the sacred union that you desire.
Mm-hmm.
You can't just, pick the handsome new age guy in harem pants and be like, okay, we're going to have sacred union. It's bigger than that.
Mm-hmm.
What is your relationship with the divine? What is your relationship with the masculine? What is your relationship with your own feminine? And what is your capacity to set your ego aside and to submit to a will that is greater than your own, to a guidance that is greater than your own?
Mm-hmm. What would you say is the answer to all of the kind of, because there's several different categories that we're speaking to. We're speaking to the feminists in the kind of classical way, which is just like everything is equal, this kind of complete egalitarianism, this androgenization. And I might read my poem, The Impossible Pregnant Man, which talks about that. But so there's this like androgenization, it's all the same. And you're like, like I get it. Like everybody should have the same rights, but there's also the WNBA for a reason. Otherwise, it would just be the NBA, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
y'all, like, let's be real. You know what I mean? Like there's differences, and it's beautiful. And it doesn't mean there shouldn't be a WNBA, of course. Great. Like have a WNBA, fantastic. And have an NBA, like allow there to be this difference. So there's that kind of crazy movement where then, you're getting feminists, and I will read this poem at some point. They're like promoting this, yes, men can be pregnant too. And it's a fucking emoji. And you're like, what is this really what you want?
What a better way to control humanity than confuse identity.
Right. Like this is a dark cut. I guess we'll go there first, but I'm ultimately going to be then leading into the question of, so that's one category. And then there's the other kind of empowered goddess movement, where there's all of these empowered goddesses who are really in their king, who are like, I need to find my king. And it's like, where's their room? Where's there room for a king in this? So I want to ask your question about like, all right, what does somebody who has cultivated that level of masculine ability and provision, like how does that work? But I'll first start, since I've teased it already, and talk about the first step of this, which is that, kind of feminism, which I think is somewhat dying out in this moment, kind of had its peak. And I feel like we're on the downside of the peak with the way that things are being thought of now. But I'm going to read this poem first, and then I'm going to get to my next question, which I think is a very important question. But let's read The Impossible Pregnant Man to just talk about how absurd this gets when you try to actually collapse, the difference between men and women and say that everybody can do everything that everybody else can do. It's fucking absurd, The Impossible Pregnant Man. I ask myself, why is there a pregnant man emoji? Because if you know any biology, you'll realize this is not an anomaly or genetic abnormality. It's an absolute impossibility, unless it is prophecy. What if this intended dysphoria is a transhumanist agenda designed to render mothers entirely obsolete because it's a category where men can't compete? The final victory of radical patriarchy, who needs women when we can make lab-grown meat that grows human feet? And get feminists to herald this miraculous feat. And then without the polarity, sexual desire will expire and the power of state will be total and complete. For without the erotic, it's all diabolic. How much kinetic force can you apply to get what you want? So if defending the gift of motherhood is heretical, I'll be standing on the pyre singing, come on, baby, light my fire.
Amazing. And that's obviously a hyperbolic example of the feminization of men and the masculinization of the feminine. But again, it's when we confuse identity, we become easier to control. Mm-hmm. And we are blessed enough to engage with a certain aspect of counterculture that's different than the mainstream world. But in the mainstream world, there are a lot of passive feminine men who have, sought satiation to the point where they can't even get an erection, let alone think about fighting the government.
Yeah.
Right? Not going to stand up and fight for a woman because that would make him bad. She can do it herself. Something horrendous is happening to a woman in the street. He's like, oh, if I go defend her, I'll get in trouble and get canceled because she was going to punch him in the face. It's like, what sort of culture have we created of lack of protection? Mm-hmm. And men who can't protect, and then men who would be not protecting themselves if they were to protect, right? There's the passivity in modernism. It's like, let's pump them with toxic food and Diet Coke and keep them dumb and fat and stupid, unable to cultivate their own hormones. And we have a very easy to control populace. And that's why I think that we have to look at anything that is popularized, we have to look at with a little bit of skepticism.
Mm-hmm.
And thus we come to the modern empowered goddess boss babe culture, which I wouldn't say that I ever went into boss babe, but I was a deeply devout in worship and reverence to the goddess, well studied in, history of the goddess, of the temple priestess, of all these things. And it's still important and relevant. But as soon as this starts becoming popular, and they're two different ones, within more mainstream culture, we have boss babe. It's like woman on Instagram in the pantsuit coaching other coaches to be coaches, right? Like doing this whole, like, you can make this much money too. And she's burnt out at the end of the day, probably doesn't want to make love to her partner if she can even find a partner that she's not making 4 times as much as, where he's not feeling like a beta masculine in some way. And that's like a little bit more in the mainstream. And then within our own pocket of counterculture, of New Ageism and spirituality and modern thought-provoking conversation and culture, we have the goddesses dressed head to toe in the cliche costume of what it looks like for you to be an empowered goddess and for you to, and then we have the like, and trust me, as a women's coach, it's its own thing for me to be speaking on, right?
Mm-hmm.
But we have the representation of what it is to be in power. And the more popularized that gets, the more that we have to look at, is it not the same game just being played within this pocket where we thought that we were being safe and where we thought that we were going against the system? But here we have, again, a woman who doesn't need anything from a man because she can make her own whatever figures, right? And eight figures and do her own thing, dressed in her like matching set, with her zip tie crown. Trust me, I've worn a zip tie crown.
Mm-hmm.
Like there's aspects of this that are embedded within me and within my culture, but we have to look at the aspects of ourself that we are trying to present as power and empowered, that's actually not empowered, because there is no place for union.
Mm-hmm.
And that's like, I believe that union is the whole point of it all. And that union, when we cultivate it, will birth a new age. And I say this carefully because we see this within Christianity of like the rapture. We're all going to be saved and blast off to this magical land of heaven where everything's all of a sudden okay. And we're dancing with Jesus and sitting at a table filled with gold. And then we have it in the new age movement where we're going to ascend to the 5D. And we're going to go, it's escapism mentality. Heaven on earth is not about going anywhere else. It's actually the codex that Yeshua gave us. The keys to the kingdom are in your own heart. It's right here, right now.
Mm-hmm.
Yet it's about acknowledging union, coming into true love, and this is about the workshop that we're putting on of devotion as a revolution. What if changing the world was as simple as moving through our wounds with the masculine and feminine, be it your man, be it your woman, moving through your trust wounds and coming into love, reverence, and respect for one another. And that simple act of coming into union, not needing to fill all the roles, be all the things, that cultivated the heaven on earth that we need to be a better world.
Yeah. All right. So as somebody who has enough of the flavor, like you could be boss babe, you could goddess out all the way. But also, you're carrying these other codes. So let's take this from the meta-theoretical, how you would advise this meta-theoretical goddess who, and I see them all over. They have great aptitude. They have great capability, like King Elizabeth. They're king of their own kingdoms. They're doing this and they're deeply craving a king also, but they find themselves with, mostly queen type men who are attenuating to their needs and dealing with it because they're actually the one thrusting into the world and providing the majority of resources, et cetera. How do you, so if you stand in and just get real personal, like how do you approach a relationship where, because I think clearly you're someone who's desiring also a king, like a real king to stand. So what do you do with all of your own king qualities in that so that it works, so that actually the union, fits and it brings out the best in both of you?
Well, of course I have my inner frame and my focus, but the only reason that I'm following that to the degree that I am is because it has been asked and ordained of me by God. Mm-hmm. And my first devotion and my first radical submission is to God's will. Mm-hmm. And I had to learn some of these more masculine topside qualities because I could have laid on my proverbial sheepy for forever, just in ceremony and ritual and feminine melt. And I had to learn how to create and follow that which God had asked me to do. But before engaging with a partner, it's also my job to come to him not hardened of the world, right? And to also make sure that my work never drives me into a place. Of course, there will be hard days or, stressful moments, but it's also my job to inner resource so that when I turn and come into my union, I am still in my feminine. And it's also through his radical masculinity, his penetrative frame and gaze that's like bigger than mine. I have this crude statement of like, I have a big mission dick, so I need a man who has a bigger mission dick than me, right? I need a man whose vision is grander and that I can get behind his vision. So that and of course he'll support mine, but he's not all of a sudden submitting and following mine. Mm-hmm. And there's a inherent play and softness and joy and radiance within me that cannot be abandoned for the mission. And how blessed am I that my work gets to be talking about love and femininity. So how burnt out can it make me? But I do encounter the should I make 3 times more than you moment. That does exist and is something that I'm still noodling out. And I don't know that necessarily needs to change as long as I'm not all of a sudden trying to daddy him and provide for him. If I want to take my man or a man that I'm seeing out to dinner, I ask him permission if I may take him to dinner so that it's also his choice and he can decide if that's rightful. If I'm like, either it's your birthday or, it's a special occasion or da-da-da-da, and may I take you to dinner tonight? I would love to pay for dinner if that feels rightful for you. I will always place myself in the role of feminine and not be hardened by the topside world. And in an ideal world, allow me to go to counsel for him, for visions with my project, visions with my mission. I was recently asked by a dear client of mine if she could walk with the legacy of my work. Mm-hmm. And at the time I was spending time with a man that I was seeing, and I was rolling this around and contemplating it, brought it to my team. We're kind of bouncing off different ideas off each other. And I brought it to him, trusting his leadership, his guidance, his sight. And he actually, through his questioning, through his guidance, brought me to the pathway that I can take that's the most rightful and will allow this work to create as much impact as possible. And in that, in his provision, in his sight, like me not being so boss babe of like, this is my thing, I'll figure it out, I don't need your advice, actually going to the masculine and receiving his leadership. And that could have been the man that I was seeing. That could have been a dear, trusted brother of mine. Prior to my dad's stroke, that would have been my father, right? Leaning in for the masculine guidance. And where that took me to a level that I actually couldn't have reached. And don't get me wrong, in the conversation, I'm uncomfortable, I'm crying, I'm, moving through my own edges of what it is to take this baby little prayer that God placed in my heart and expand it and build it into something bigger. And while that man isn't necessarily my man, or we don't know if he's my man, there's the ability for me to humble myself and ask for support that maybe a more empowered boss babe iteration of myself wouldn't have been able to do.
So what this is bringing up for me is there's a quality of a king that knows when to bend the knee. And I think the first place that any good king bends the knee is to God. Has to, no matter how powerful you are. If you don't bend the knee to God, then you don't know the proper relationship of dominance hierarchy, right? And then also in the real world, you also know when it's time, no matter how gleaming and sharp and big your Excalibur is, where you lay that sword down on the table and say, my sword is yours. And it reminds me of a moment where I first did my podcast with Robert F. Kennedy Jr., and I have a big mission. I have a big sword. I have a gleaming Excalibur. I wear one around my neck that's a symbol of the sword that is actually the truth of my being. But when I finished that podcast, I went into my own, medicine journey in visionary state. And I just texted him right then after meeting him for the first time, before he announced his presidential run, anything like that. And he said, I just saw the quality of a true king, like a once in future king, a once in a generation king. And I said, I give you my word and I give you my sword, like my service is yours. And I think in the well-developed masculine, we all know when it's time to lay our swords down and say, like, my sword is all in for your campaign. Like this, what your mission is actually from God's perspective, the most important mission. So everything I can do, anything I can do, what you need, I'll stop everything, I'll drop everything, because my campaigns, yes, they're important. I'll pick them back up. And I know that you'll give me the provision and the freedom to continue on my mission, because you actually are receiving the gift of that and acknowledging. You're not just taking like, okay, thank you, great. Now, handle these emails for me and whatever. It's like, there's a way in which the refined masculine, someone who's lived in the masculine, knows when it's time to like lay your sword down and join the force of another sword. It's more potent. And I think that's exactly what you were pointing to, where you do have a sword. You have a sword and a mission that you're carrying, but it gives you actually the safety and the foundation where you're able to wait till you can find that man who has that other sword, where you can say, I lay my sword down knowing that you'll help me with my sword when the time is right. But actually my sword is yours. My chalice is yours. My whole self is yours. And I think I see that in the well-developed masculine. And it's not just Robert F. Kennedy. There's other times, other brothers and other people where it's like, okay, I lay it down. I'm all yours. Like I'm here. And I think that's, one of the aspects that's in the feminine that's developing their masculine qualities. They probably haven't, I don't know, maybe it's just not completely natural to them, or it's just not encoded in like the epigenetic transfer of the understanding of this kind of quality of a king, where you join together and unite the clans and lay your sword down, like put aside your own personal mission to say that there's a greater collective mission, and to like really actually know when it's time to bend the knee. Like there's an understanding of hierarchy in the line quality of the masculine where we just get it. And we get it. And so I think one piece of that, what you said, really invites a deeper understanding for me, because what you're saying is like, I'm not going to hide my sword. Here's my sword. Here it is. It's beautiful and it's sharp. And I'm super willing to lay that down if I can find a man who has a mission and a sword that's greater, and trust that also there'll be provision for me to actually go fight my battles as well.
It reminds me of the Arthurian legend, the Lady of the Lake, King Arthur, and even like Knights of the Round Table as a whole. Each one of those men, powerful warrior men, noble in battle, laid down their sword for Arthur, because Arthur was a king that was in protection and provision of England, of her. Within that was like of the womb, and then if we get like even nerdier, of the lineage of the priestesses, of the grail, of the protection of the sacred blood, the sacred womb. And the Lady of the Lake is her own fucking powerful mystical force. And over again, she stands in the water. It's in the water that, yes, the sword went into stone, and then it descends into the water, into the Lady of the Lake's terrain. And it's thought of that she was, Merlin gave a sacred object gave it to the Lady of the Lake, and she forged that sword for the sacred protection of the feminine, of the country, of the land. And then it was given to Arthur's father, whatever. We know the whole story. But over and over again, she stands in the water, arm straight, maybe almost quivering. When you are ready, it's here.
Mm-hmm.
She's not like, are you the one? Are you the one? Are you the one? She's there holding the sword. When you're ready, here it is. And this speaks to both, my relationship with my sword and my mission, which is just to bring back honor, devotion, and reverence and union back onto this earth, but also the initiatory essence of a devotional woman. I will hold the sword for you, and when you are ready, you will take it. And there's this poignant moment I know we've spoken about our favorite iteration of the King Arthur in that one film, but this moment isn't displayed in that film, but it's displayed in older versions, where King Arthur and Lancelot get into a little play battle. And Lancelot is known to be like the best warrior, right? And he's so handsome and so charming. And King Arthur's ego gets the best of him. And he tries to vest Lancelot. And in that, the sword falls and breaks. And in this like cheesy version of this movie, Merlin appears and he's like, "What did you do? How will the protection of this kingdom occur?" And he's like, "I let my ego get the best of me. I don't know why. Now I've like ruined this mission." And that was he saw immediately the qualities of the lesser king, the qualities of his ego. He was not without, egoic distortion. He was not without flaw or failure, but he saw it immediately. He said, "Fuck, that wasn't an integrity." And then the water falls, or the broken sword falls into the water, and appears the Lady of the Lake. And she reforges that sword and hands it to him. "You want it? It's yours. You have showed again and again that you are the quality of the man capable, but I'm not going to force it upon you. It is your free will to take it." And so, in my own experience, I'm not going to be like, "I have this sword that can do great things, and if you take it, we can change the face of union and love in the world together. You want it? You want it? You want it? Here it is, and it's your free will. I'm not going to beg for my worth or my value to be seen. I know who I be, and I know what wielding this sword carries, and I know what also the initiatory rite of me laying down my sword for your mission is. And it's your free will. Now we see in the empowered goddess movement, she's like, don't you see how worthy I am? Don't you see everything that I am? Don't you want this? Why wouldn't you want it? And then when he doesn't want it, after her forcing it on him, she emasculates him, talk shit on him in the community, whatever it may look like, right? Like he wasn't able to X, Y, and Z.
Yeah. Yeah, that aspect of, and that is it's an aspect that I think is a quality that extends from the masculine and the feminine, which is the honoring of the free will, which is really like, I call you forward, like I call forward your chalice, I call forward your sword, but I'm not going to force it. I'm not going to force it upon you. There has to be a moment where your natural inertia draws you to that. And otherwise you will never trust it. Ultimately, anyways, you have to trust that this is a part of the spirit that's moving through that person, that, they will pull the sword or they will receive the chalice fully of their own free will and volition. Otherwise, like, you'd be like, did you really want to do that? Or did I kind of convince you to do that in this way and kind of cajole you and control you into doing it? And it's that interesting dance of, but that's all the myths are, is that the one who is truly worthy will be irresistibly, inexorably drawn to that moment, to receive the chalice or to draw the sword. And so, just speaking as a friend, that, you find yourself in a cool position because you have no desperate need for somebody to go actually claim you and take this thing. You're like, actually, I'm fine. And I'm waiting and I'm ready. I'm ready for the true king, that wants to come and take this dance, but I'm okay. And I think that is a part of the, that's part of a situation that I think has improved, is that women can provide for themselves and they can take care of things, and that can allow a greater discretion about like who they allow to actually receive the vessel, receive their chalice, receive that, and then take whatever aspect of their sword and join it into theirs and do that. So, because otherwise, if, a woman couldn't make her own way, and then she basically has to choose quickly from available options of like, well, fuck, like I got to figure this out. I'm out of my parents' house at 18. Like I don't have a way to earn my own way. And I guess you'll do. And this guy's like, yep, I guess you'll do. And we'll just do this thing. But it's not actually the ability to choose. So there have been some blessings from modernity, but it has to be known within the context of this gives you the freedom and time to wait for that right person who can come in and then offer that. And when that does happen, the attuned masculine aspects that is holding the sword in the feminine has to say like, great, this mission is, this mission, I give you my sword in this mission. And, obviously, as any great king will know, it's like, thank you for this. And I will call upon that aspect of you whenever it is needed. And in the meantime, support me in my mission, but also I'll support you in yours. And there'll be many, many moments where you can flourish and go off in your own battle, but I'll always be there, with the dragons and the other noble knights. And if ever you're in trouble, like, don't you worry. Like, I'll be there charging in on my gallant steed, Bucephalus, and my double-plumed helmet. Like, we'll come riding in like the riders of Rohan at that one moment where you're needed. And then but then implicitly always when I need you, like I know you're there because you see the mission that I'm on and you see how important it is.
And a piece of the devotional feminine that we haven't quite touched into, but is so relevant here, is that she is womb embodied. She's descended, dropped down into her feeling body, not her topside mind. And so in this, like, I lay down my sword for a masculine man, it's like, I just have to be womb embodied. I just have to be listening, feeling, and making sure that in all my moments of leading my own mission, I'm doing so from a descended place, not just from my mind, but from this deep felt pull, like this gravitational pull into the mother with the wisdom of the earth, all of that. And that's what makes it intuitive. And that's what makes, when she's the chalice, right? That chalice is rooted in the mother. She's descended into her womb. And then that chalice becomes the great multiplier. A devotional woman, she offers her mission to his mission, and she will multiply the fruits of his labor 1,000-fold, right? Give her seed, she creates child. She is the great multiplier in her nature. But for any woman listening to this, and myself, when you're leading a mission and able to make your own resources so that you can sit back and wait for the man that God has for you, for a rightful match, don't get lost in the mind. Stay dropped into your womb so that you can feel when he comes, so that you know what is rightful to multiply from a knowing, a gnosis, rather than a knowing. And that's how you sense, because he might not come in the shape, size, shell that your ego has contorted for your dream man, with the list of qualities that you think that he's going to walk forward with.
Right. And I think it's also important too is, in every great epic story, there's the man who's like the hero. The hero in the masculine is called forward because of a need presented by the goddess. And that's often represented in this princess archetype, because the princess represents purity, and the princess needs protection and needs. And I think one of the challenges for, women who are in this kind of boss babe goddess thing is the man looks and there's no need. You don't need me. Okay, well, I want to be needed. I desire to be needed. So if you don't need me, and you got it all taken care of, in some ways that's attractive, because there's the over codependent, you're going to need me for everything. You can't handle your shit on your own. But actually we're drawn, our phallus gets hard, when our sword gets sharp and gleaming, when there's a need. When there's an actual need. So to present yourself with the vulnerability of I have all of these things, I've taken care of all of this, and I need you. I really need you. I can't be complete without you. I can't, my mission could be so much greater. I need, because of my call to God, I need you, and that, I think the presentation of need is such an important quality. And it's important, even in the king, in the masculine, I need you. I can't, sure, I could, get dates that could satisfy my sexual desires. I could, find places to ejaculate. I could find, I could pay masseuses to rub my back. I can sort this out, but no, I need you. And I think the disclosure of need is also something that I think is highly erotic. And there's the first low level need, which is this codependence, which is I need you, which is kind of manic. But then there's this higher level need of no, I need you to accomplish the mission that God ordained. And that disclosure of need is that invitation that I think will cause that, the gallant knight and the true king to rise and say oh, wow. You need me. Now, it can become twisted in the shadow version when you see someone who needs you so bad because you got to fix them. You got to, this is a fucking mess. To save them, right? And it's a different type of thing, right? Because that's ultimately, it can be attractive at first, but ultimately becomes unattractive, because then you're spending all your time trying to save them. But there's an attraction to need, especially that higher level, kind of post-tragic need, that I think is essential for both everyone to display. That actually I'm in a capacity where I'm not so full that I don't need anything. I still really need you. The sword needs the chalice needs the sword. Or if you're a king, I have a great sword, and I need your sword too. And I need your sword too. And I need your sword too, because our mission is so great that I can't do it on my own. I'm not going to be able to do this by myself.
There's this radical beauty to the concept of like needing from wholeness. It's like, I am whole and complete unto myself and God, but I need you in order to, as you said, do that which God has called me towards. I see a lot of women be like, I need a man who can provide for me, like financially, but it's coming from a save me. I don't want to have to do it. I don't want to figure it out. Save me, as opposed to the woman who doesn't, she's not grasping for him to do this thing. She's not grasping to be saved. She needs as a form of protection. There's like, it's this very subtle nuance of a man will not want to provide when it's like, I have to save you because you are floundering. Sure, there might be like a momentary reprieve in that. But when we look at the architecture of princess, if she was daughter, he's not saving her because she's like, you know, in this life or death situation. He's showing up because he cares for her and wants to provide for her, wants to bless her life, wants to protect her in that way. Not because she every day finds herself in a life or death situation where he needs to show up and save her. And I think that one of the most repelling things for a man's relationship to freedom is a grasping. I need, as opposed to the whole need of like, I need you. I need your leadership. I need your sword. I need your love. I need your guidance. That's different than save me. That's, I see who you are and I will be made better by you. And that is why I need you.
Yeah. Yeah. And then in that moment, it's so easy to forget what the provision that originally was, you know, and again, I have absolute love and reverence for, you know, all the partners I've ever had, except for one real sketchy one in college, who was really not cool. But that was those are the early days, and I think everybody's had that one where you're like, "Whoa, what the fuck was I thinking there? That was fucked up from the start, and it continued fucked up the whole way." But for the most part, like all my partnerships, you know, I have just such radical beauty and love for everybody that I've been with, and you know, I recall in a former partner, and it's not necessary to name names, but she was in a situation where she had a job, and the job was working graveyard shift selling gems on this jewelry infomercial channel from like 2 to 7 a.m. in the morning, right? And she's young, out of college, like, you know, has a job, and she's doing this thing, she's pretty good at it, but it's destroying her life. Like she's needing to take Ambien at like 8 a.m. because her circadian rhythm's all fucked up, and it's like deteriorating her. And I'm coming in, and I didn't have the type of wealth I do now, but I was like, yeah, you don't need to do that anymore. Like, don't worry. Like, I got you, you know, and here's other beautiful missions that you can go on and other beautiful things. And at first, you feel that sense of the gratitude of the receiving of that, and then the devotion that comes. But then all too quickly, you know, it gets forgotten that provision was not just a one-time provision. That provision is an everlasting provision. That provision is like, this provision is ongoing. Like, you're still not having to do that every single day. You're still, you know what you're doing? You're sleeping soundly in your bed. And it's not that you couldn't have found something else. I mean, you could have, of course, improved, but in that situation, like, there's a provision that's ongoing. And that provision, if you look at it and are aware of it and call it into your mind, you understand that there's that provision then should compel a level of devotion. But you just have to be aware of it, because it's easy to forget. He's like, oh, this is my life now. And my life now is like a life of luxury, and you can take it for granted. And then that starts to deteriorate the sense of, okay, now we're in reciprocal devotion, because, you know, the provision gets easily forgotten because it's some, you know, relic of the past or a moment that's gone by. But the provision was ongoing the whole time, you know.
Well, and you provided to protect her radiance and her
Yes.
femininity. And also just her health, right?
Yeah, totally.
With the circadian rhythm like that. But that's the gift of like monetary and physical provision, is like so that I can be a radiant woman. And like, this is controversial, but it's like, then woman, if you are being supported, be well kept. Like, meet your man with grace, care for him, show up in your beauty, like be sanctuary. Both, again, controversial. Take what resonates, leave what doesn't, audience. But, be sanctuary in your appearance, in your energy. Doesn't mean you need to be perfect. You're going to have moments where, yes, you slip into the amnesia and you forget, or you're angry, or, the man says something dickish and you're like, bro, not cool. That's still all welcome. But what is it to then love and pour into the man? Your job becomes caring for the one, cultivating this level of freedom, this level of sanctuary for you. And like, enjoy your life and do things that bring you joy, right? Do art, create pottery, whatever that looks like for you. Whatever can cultivate joy, because joy is this inherent feminine gift. Like, it's the miracle of the feminine nature, our ability to access wonder and radiance and magnetism. And like, we are this effervescent wellspring of magnetism that the masculine gets to tap into and replenish in. We are the hot spring where he is revived. We are the waterfall where he is cleansed. Be that, and not just for him, but that is also your mission, your service, your gift to the world. Because a woman who's not in her radiance, when she engages with the teller at the grocery store, at the bank, and she's like, yeah, that's fine, is she contributing to a better world? Is she being the torch lit for love and devotion out in the world? Because when the woman who's in her radiance smiles and opens her heart and looks at the grocery store clerk in the eyes and says, thank you so much, that little moment can make someone's day. And that is, I use this analogy of the torch lit of love in the heart. Then she ignites that grocery store clerk's torch. And then the next person that they check out, they look into the eyes and they spread love and joy and radiance. And it keeps going. And it's the, like the passing it on. What was that movie? Anyways, it's the
pay it forward.
Yeah, pay it forward. It's the paying it forward of radiance and joy and love. And that is a woman's service of the world, among many.
And it also like, one of the things that I can't bear is if I'm in providing in a place of radical provision and my partner is, continually unhappy. Because then it's like, well, what am I even doing this for? If you're in a continual state of unhappiness, you're not able to access your radiance. You're always in this state of, emotional disturbance. Like, what's the whole point of my effort? Because the personal goddess becomes representative of the global goddess, and then the man starts to think, why am I fighting? What are these wounds? What is the blood that's on, that's seeping in sweat, that's seeping out of my body as I go to war every day? What's it for then? What's it for then, if not to create radiance in my home and create radiance in the world? Why should I even fight? Might as well just, slip into a ketamine stupor and jump on my favorite video game or chess app or whatever the hell it might be. And, so those are things that I can find myself slipping into as well. But when the goddess surrounding me is in their radiance and in there, it's like, okay, what I'm doing is being received. And actually, so I got to keep doing it. Like, this is worth it. It makes sense. One one of the things that, you just mentioned that about being this kind of sanctuary. And I wrote this poem from the feminine perspective to the masculine, and I called it a Dakini to a warrior. And I think there's many roles that the feminine can play, but one of them, I think, in partnership is the role of the Dakini, is the one who can cultivate that erotic energy to actually cleanse and purify and draw forward
Wash
the best.
the war off him.
Wash the war off of them. Exactly. So this is my poem, a Dakini to a warrior. O warrior of man, summon the outrageous courage to be captured in the petals of my bloom, my armored amour. Expose your soft flesh to the sun-wet kisses of the resplendent light. I am here to allure you, to caress and redress those tender war wounds with delicate rapture. I crave your hunger. I devour your delight. Let me fuck you free from fettering memory. Plunge your world sword into the lapping lake of purity as you soak in my carnal reflection of your black swan beauty. Pierce me with your laughter. Sing the songs of your scars. Roar with a raging heart and vanquish me with truth. O warrior of man, summon the outrageous courage to be healed in the petals of my bloom.
So beautiful. And it's like that's the ancient art. Like temple priestesses were devotional women, washing the war off of men. And if the masculine is logos, mind, word, time, the topside world, the feminine is eros. And it is for her to, part of the devotional arts is activating that eros to bring him back into union so that he is not solely in the logos, in the war of the mind. So whether the battlefield is the workplace or that, over neurotic mentalization that so many men that we know are in, it's like to bring in the eros, the feeling body, that sweet tonality of the mother of Sophia consciousness, right? And to bring forward the eros to allow him to drop into the soma, to step out of the mind. And my work actually got started in the realm of teaching women the erotic arts. And my young mission was I want to help women be able to have the most profound orgasms possible. But what I found over and over again was no matter the technique or the skill or the self-pleasure practices or the, erotic self-dance that you were doing, a woman's relationship to her orgasm was so directly connected to her trust in the masculine and to her trust in the higher masculine, the cosmic masculine, the energetic tonality of God the Father, whether it's a figment of our imagination or not, that construct. And so in order for a woman to access the full essence of the Dakini in truth, not performatively, but in truth, she must be in harmony with the masculine, with the system, and with God the Father. And then she can access the full potentiality of the art of her eros in order to both melt in her own pleasure and bring another lover. Because in order to be a good lover, you must be selfless. You must be in devotion. To be crude, that would be the most boring blowjob in the world, where she's like, I got to be here doing this. It's a woman who's in her pleasure, who's in her giving, who's doing it devotionally, receiving him. That's what makes a blowjob fun, right? And in my quest for women to feel pleasure, I found that the wound was actually in relationship with the masculine and God. So I reframed my work in order to bring forward erotic devotion, was what I called it. I had to start at the baseline, healing the relationship with the masculine, healing the wound of where it has not been safe for a woman to be in devotion, what has blocked her from that, her father wound, all these pieces. And what I've observed is that, and what I've had testimony of, is that women who have done this work to heal and reframe their relationship with the masculine come into the most ecstatic, erotic rapture of their life. The most, I've heard from women's husbands, boyfriends of I don't know what you did, but she is another woman, both, at home and in the bedroom. Because she has accessed her own sovereign pleasure, because she is finally safe. Not because she's projecting her safety onto a man, but because she's done that work to receive, to not turn away from the provision of who he be, but to look at the sun straight on.
Beautiful. There's a concept that comes up in your work about extractive qualities. And I think there's been a lot of discussion about the extractive qualities of the masculine. It's all real. Masculine has extracted from the earth without proper reciprocity. We've extracted meat from animals without the proper honoring of the animal that you see in all the indigenous cultures, and you find this in all the indigenous cultures. Even when I was in Australia and we were about to enter this natural preserve, this landscape, the old fellas there who are a part of the old way, they clack their talking sticks in a particular order, and they listen for permission to enter into the sanctuary of Gaia. It's like they're listening and in right relation rather than, well, let's just go here. It's a hike. I found this on my Maps quest. And here we are oh, nice. Now let's take a photo and let's fucking leave. And I'm going to leave my trash along the way. And there's an extractive quality of the masculine that's not paying attention and attuned to the feminine. There's an extractive sexual quality. All of the pickup artists, games and things that they do using neuro-linguistic programming and this idea of negging somebody. So you drop a woman's self-worth and esteem, and then you become the salve that can fix it. And there's all kinds of extractive qualities that are in the masculine. And I think those have been well highlighted. And then there's a very limited band of the extractive qualities of the feminine, which you would call the gold digger, someone who's just extracting money in exchange for some transactional eros. So that's been, all right, so we painted those broad strokes, but there's deeper and more nuanced subtlety to extraction and what extractive qualities actually look like in relationship. And I'd love for you to really dive into it, what extraction looks like in the subtlety, not in the obvious. We know the obvious, but what about in the subtlety?
So if you spend some time scrolling social media, which all of us do, there's an interesting pocket of the internet that I've come across that is femme fatale. It is this subtle tonality of manipulate him using this 3-point eye gaze into desiring you. Do this thing in order for him to X, Y, and Z. Dress like this, speak like this, and this will make him want you. And the femme fatale archetype, in truth, is a form of extraction. It's a manipulation. And manipulation is simply a doing to get, which I believe anything that is a doing to get and is not from wholeness is a distortion. So oftentimes women, we don't see it in those broad stroke aspects that you brought forward. Okay, yeah, the gold digger, obviously. But what about the doing to get a feeling of worthiness? doing to get a feeling of approval. We look at a lot of the wounding patterns that we as women hold and have. And if you're so empowered that you can't even look at your own honest relationship to your self-worth, then you will be extracting from him for worth, for value, to be seen. You will present yourself in a certain way for validation, going for those likes, those, little dopamine hits of approval. It's extractive. And that's why the thirst trap is extractive. It's not only extracting from the masculine psyche, keeping him distracted from his mission, from a greater purpose, from a greater cause, but it's also, I'm posting this to get approval because I am not enough. And I think that the lesser looked at aspects, the more nuanced aspects of extraction are the feminine wounding patterns, these parts of us that are not whole, that we are seeking to be made whole by masculine energy or approval. There's also extraction for power, which the feminine striving for power from her man is coming from a wounded architecture within her. So how does she do this? It's with subtle comments. It's with her gaze. It's with her dress. It's subtle ways where she is trying to get something from him.
Or a subtle withdrawal that compels, a response, but it's
withdrawal is form of punishment.
Yeah. That one is, all of these. So what I'm hearing you say, if I'm hearing it correctly, is all forms of manipulation, the doing something to get something in return in this transactional quality it is parasitic, vampiric, extractive, and it's in different colors and flavors of severity, of course, but in the subtlety of it, it's all extractive when you're doing something for a specific response. Even giving for what you're going to get back from that. I'm going to take you to dinner so that you give me anal later. Basically that would be an extractive form of gift giving. It's no, I'm going to take you to dinner, lishma, and we're going to have the best time. And what I receive, I trust, will be what is in right accord with what's compelled in your heart, right? So it's giving, even the act of giving, can be extractive depending upon the intention of giving. If you're not giving for the giving's sake itself, and then trusting that what will return will be naturally. If you're appearing in a certain way, that presentation of beauty or that sanctuary is a gift that is not for the purpose of creating something, but it's for its own sake. And then what comes back naturally will come back naturally, but it's about not doing something for, another purpose. It's doing it for its own sake.
And there's so much nuance here because it involves the feminine and the masculine lifting the veil again and again and again to the subtleties of the extraction, because in its rawest form, it's energy harvesting. It's the parasites eating away at the nutrients of your body. It's a woman putting on an outfit to seduce him, to have sex. The woman herself maybe isn't even embodied enough or, within her sexual artistry to fully reach her full capacity of orgasm and have the best experience ever. But it serves her approval. And then on this really primal level, she extracts his seed, his life force, right? Leaving him more depleted, leaving her full of his chi.
Yeah.
Right? And I mean, there's nothing wrong with, receiving a man's semen in whatever capacity a woman wants to, enjoy. And there's rightful moments, but when you're subtly doing it manipulatively to receive, And that's the other thing is like women who offer their sex to like feel better about themselves. Not only are they extracting from him, they're extracting from that sacred current of eros that pulses within them. They're extracting from their own yin, their own shakti, their own feminine wellspring.
Yeah, one subtle form of, that I feel is net extractive and also calls me forward to offer a provision is in the subtle self-denigration about appearance or about something else. So making a comment about my hair looks this way, my outfit looks this way, my body looks in some negative form. And then that extracts, what that's looking to extract is me to say, no, you don't. You look great, like blah, blah, blah. And that's true. And I'm kind of happy to do it, but it's the subtle form. And then I think the higher provision is I do not comply with any negative comments that you're making about yourself. Like the provision is that is off the table. And, I think that's something that it applies to both sides. Like if I'm doing that personally, it's not, usually about my appearance. It's about like, I don't know if I'm going to be able to make it. I don't think I'm, I don't know if I'm capable. It's about my capacity, my efficacy, my potency. So, which is ultimately net extractive. And some of this is just the human frailty and is all beautiful and forgiven when you can't do better than that. But I think these general ideas of the provision of like, no, like that's just off the table. Like I'm not going to allow you to diminish your own radiance. I'm not going to allow anybody else to diminish your radiance. I'm not going to allow, just like I wouldn't allow somebody else, in here to be like, hey, you really look like shit today. I'd be like, you shut your fucking mouth. You do not talk to my wife like that. You do not talk to my partner like that. Like, you shut your fucking mouth, or like, we'll figure this out, But then when it's themselves, you're not going to be that harsh, but also like removing that from the table and saying like, no, you don't. The provision is like, I will not comply and not play, not participate in this game of self-denigration, in any capacity. Like, you're beautiful. I see you as beautiful always. Don't try to change my mind with your idea that you're not and get me to reinforce this. Like, you're fucking beautiful. And if you're really slipping in something, you really did something crazy, like, whoa, that's way too much lip injection. Like, fucking, y'all chill, like whatever. Like, there's something legit, trust me, like, I'll tell you. But otherwise, or if there's just like, I don't know, what do you think? Should I do this or this? Like, beautiful. But like removing the self-denigration on both sides, the ways that you're actually, that inner critic voice that's actually drawing you down, like drawing from you as you think it, and then drawing from your partner as you share it, like kind of removing that also is creates a more verdant and revitalizing, revivifying wellspring of energy.
And there's two tones here. One is the provision, yes, but the other is masculine correction, where he can correct her behavior. And then the provision is the higher level thinking that also comes from that. So imagine circumstance where, like, yes, he can give the sword, he can give the correction, like, I'm not gonna allow that kind of extraction. You have something you need to tell me, you tell me. And there's also, hey, babe, I want to reflect to you that you've asked me like 4 different questions about your appearance and, self-deprecating way in the last 10 minutes. Is there something up? How are you feeling about yourself right now? Opening the space for her to be like, I'm premenstrual. I'm not feeling beautiful. And then you get to be like, do you have a need that's coming up for you that you need support with? She can be like, I think that tonight some validation of like, I'm beautiful would feel really good. Yeah. And then he's like, I'm of service. You are not doing it all alone. There's a need that I can fulfill. When we were talking about that princess piece, like, she needs him. Or she can simply stop playing fucking games and be, if she's aware, which sometimes I'm aware, sometimes I'm not, and be like, hey, I have a need. I'm feeling self-conscious. I would love some extra validation to just help me feel strong. It's hormonal. I'm just having a moment. And if you're available for that, I would love to receive that from you, because I'm noticed wanting to tear myself down, and I don't want to extract from you.
Yeah. I mean, I know, I remember a beautiful moment of that with Vylana recently, where she's just feeling, she was, in the kind of beginning of her moon, she's like, I'm just feeling a little extra tender today. So some extra loving support would be really beautiful. And it was like, sweet. Like, now I have a direction of like how I can provide and I can show up in provision in a beautiful way. And so, I want to give so much credit to Vylana. She's been in this massively beautiful transformation where that's the method of communication that's coming. And what you're referring to too is it's the way in which the provision is delivered. And like, how do you deliver, especially with someone who is very self-critical, like, how do you deliver the provision in the softest way possible? And sometimes there's no way that's actually quite soft enough, because the self-critic is so harsh, that like, actually it's like, fuck, how do I like offer this provision in the softest way possible? What is the best, softest way that I could do this? Because I know that the force that we're dealing with wants to tear down, and in this corrective process. So, that's the dance of evolving together, trusting each other, and then so trusting the deftness of how the sword can be the most delicate in that moment. And then also the request coming from also that delicate and vulnerable place of like, instead of just going into the pattern, just be like, all right, there's something deeper going on. So this has been very like helpful to kind of give very specific kind of guidance for how to navigate these situations, which sometimes is broad gleaming strokes and like a clear, radiating line of like, all right, this is a new operating role. And then there's exceptions to that as well. And then there's moments where it's just like, okay, fuck, like this is really coming in heavy. Like, I need your support. But that communication, having that communication high rather than playing out unconscious patterns, seems like the way where it won't be net extractive in any way, or, damaging or harmful, or cause people to kind of clam up, or, getting in these emotional games where withdrawal and wounds and anger and this lack of safety that kind of comes in.
It's this aspect of weaponizing our emotions, and we as women are masterful. It's like, imagine the woman was feeling self-conscious, and she's just like, how come you never tell me I'm beautiful? You told so-and-so, my girlfriend, that you never tell me I'm beautiful. Mm-hmm. That's a weaponization, as opposed to like, I'm feeling low. I like, in the example that we already previously gave. And simultaneously, sometimes masculine correction needs to be firm. I can recall a moment in a past partnership where growing up, my parents fought dirty. They yelled. Amazing humans, amazing parents, but gosh, did they yell at each other at times. And so I was fighting with one of my partners. I was like, you fucking asshole, and screaming. And he came and got in my face and he said, you are not going to yell at me. You are not going to name call. That is not welcome in this house, in this relationship. Do you hear me? In a way that might have been perceived to the outside as aggressive. And sure, my ego had a little bit of a flare up, but ultimately I was like, hot. Yeah. Great. Done. Never again did I yell or did I name call, because I had to have that one bitch slapped into me a little bit, right? I had to have like a firm, more turbulent form of correction in order for it to land in, because it was so deeply embedded in my programming of, your whole childhood seeing your parents argue at each other in a certain way, right? And that changed me as a woman. And that was firm correction that if you were to be filming it, someone might be like, oh, their relationship dynamic isn't healthy. But in fact, it was so healthy. He was such a secure, loving, amazing partner, right?
Yeah.
He just had to meet me in the fire.
Yeah. And it's so specific on the circumstance. Mm-hmm. When is the sword, resplendent, needs to be gleaming and sharp, and the correction needs to be firm, and when can it be the most tender and the softest way possible. And also in that self-reflective thing, to avoid the hypocrisy, right? You have to always, I think, open yourself up to, okay, where am I doing this myself? Where, if I'm asking for this correction, and if I'm leading, if I'm the captain of this ship, but I'm asking for a correction, but I'm not actually applying the same correction to myself, I'm creating this strange double standard here. So I think that's also another key component of like, okay, this is the new operating system that we're downloading, and it applies universally, whatever that operating system is. And that, I think, applies to expanded monogamy, which is something that, I've explored for much of my life and I'm currently exploring. It's like there cannot be, double standards, and things are also different, right? It's like the generalities of the rules have to apply equally, and the specificity of the difference also has to be acknowledged, right? Like in my belief, there's a fundamental difference between the energetic exchange of receiving a man's phallus. Now, of course, I've never done that, but I've just never received a man's phallus inside my body. Like when a cock goes inside your vagina, it enters your womb space into your energetic body. And that is a deep penetration of the totality of that person's energy, right? As the man, if you're sliding your cock into, there's definitely an energetic exchange. It's not that there's not, there is. It's just feels to me, and obviously I haven't lived both sides, so I don't know, but intuitively my sense is, all right, there's a subtle difference here, that actually should be accounted for, even though the rules and the meta structure is the same. Let's make account for the actual differences in what the same act would be. The act is sex. Okay, but the act is different depending upon, which is, whether it's the giving or the receiving. And so, I think it's important to create like these egalitarian systems that also account for, all right, things are just a little different,
I mean, and also we are not equal. You can't get pregnant. You can get someone pregnant, but ultimately that depends on your capacity to control your ejaculation, right? A woman can get pregnant, and also in biology, and this is, getting into iffy territory, but in biology, a man seeds, would go and seed multiple women. A woman, to receive the seeding, because another Jillian quote, she's so good with her quotes, a woman is never taking a ride on a man's cock. She is always taking a ride on his consciousness, and she is then seeded with his consciousness. And so a woman would not always be seeded with would not often be seeded with multiple man's consciousness in nature, But, it's an interesting topic. And when it comes to expanded monogamy or polyamory, I'm personally templated for monogamy. So it's not my area of expertise. And I think that it's about also like meeting what each other are comfortable with and where each other are at. I recently had a friend who was sharing with me about his polyamorous dynamic, where his fiance was not comfortable with him having sex with other women, but he didn't feel trigger and was comfortable with her having full-on other relationships with men. He was just like, it doesn't bother me, let her do her thing, but she wasn't at the same place with her trigger, with him potentially falling in love, having other relationships with other women, and thus they had a different set of rules. And I actually thought that was beautiful in its own way, because it's like, great, we're working with what people are comfortable with.
Right. Yeah. And there's no one size fits all. This is all tapping into someone's unique essence and the truth of that unique essence, which people may think they have a truth, but actually it's imprinting, coding, trauma, different patterns. Just to kind of circle back and double click on that, I think, obviously I had a wild stretch of polyamory before I met my, beloved Vailana. And, she had also a wild stretch of a series of sequential monogamies, but that were fairly traumatic as a holistically, a lot of betrayal and a lot of other issues. And so we were going into some conscious, what we would call in the phenomenology of Eros, which is a new book that I'm working on with Rebbe Gaffney and Christina Kincaid. But it was a healing sexing practice. And in the healing sexing practice, Vailana assumed that because I had plunged my sword into a variety of different women of a variety of different levels of consciousness, that there would be some cleanup she had to do on my phallus, right? Like, let's get down there and let's clean up this sword. The sword's going to carry but actually, when it came down to it and she was tapped in, she's, a mystical, magical being. She's super tapped in. She, analyzed and felt and sensed if there was any remnants on the phallus for where it had been, and it'd been some wild places. Let's not get this twisted here. She wasn't wrong. She wasn't wrong in categorizing the places that the sword had been, right? But nonetheless, she's like, "Oh yeah, there's nothing to do here." And then she focused her attention on my heart. And I was like, "Actually, it's your heart. Like, it's your heart that needs the healing. It needs the devotion. It needs the love. It needs to feel like that sense of love." Conversely, as I stepped into the healing sexing with Vailana, there was a lot of work that needed to be done on the womb, on that aspect. And so it just, points to, as people are exploring this, because I think as consciousness evolves, we're going to see lots of different variations of expanded versions of monogamy, things that don't have names even yet, that are just out there as people are exploring the music of the night that's moving through them. I think it's just important to also recognize that, yes, I do believe that in this fundamental, like, it has to be a rule for me, has to be the rule for thee. And we have to recognize there are differences, and these differences are real, and they have different things that need to be accounted for and dealt with in the uniqueness of the biological sex and the difference.
And it just comes to the points that we've been weaving throughout this entire journey of, we are not equal. We can have equal rights in many cases, yes, but I will always be able to bear a child. Like, we inherently are not equal. You will always be able to fucking school me in basketball. Like, or outlift me. Like, we are designed differently. And there's beauty in that. And as we explore relational dynamics, be it in expanded monogamy, traditional monogamy, monogamy plus threesomes, whatever floats your boat, there's an honoring of, like, actually the pain body, the core wounds, the heart, the tender parts. And I feel like those are, and the energetic and the magical and the spiritual and the psycho-spiritual. And we have to approach relationship through this multidimensional lens. There is no one size fits all. And that's why I call the broad strokes of my work multidimensional intimacy. Because there's so many ways that we explore intimate relating. And we have to, like, expand our level of awareness, expand our sight, expand our ability to track the multidimensional truths in relationship. And I think that that's the piece with the sword that you wear, that I wear, of what is our ultimate submission to truth and love. I said this to you yesterday, of the feminine is tuned to love, and the masculine is tuned to truth. And in union, the feminine knows truth, and in union, the masculine knows love.
That's beautiful. And I think a good way to wrap this up with the final transmission of deep power. And I think that is really what they are. And they are, in some ways synonyms for God. And this was a powerful transmission that I had, was in the first big Bufo journey that I had, which I think somewhat inadvisedly, I was also on a massive dose of MDMA from the facilitator, like 350 milligrams of MDMA and a massive Bufo dose. And anyways, I'm not recommending that. And I think it was irresponsible by the facilitator. But nonetheless, it was a powerful moment, as you could probably imagine. But the transmission that came through that stuck with me the whole time is that God, truth, and love are synonyms. They're just different faces of expressing God. And the masculine holding the face of God that is truth, the feminine holding the face of God that is love, but all of us being able in union, to find the God that's in between the intertwisted cherubs, the space in between where truth and love meet. And that opens up the kingdom of heaven.
The third mystical thing.
Kelsey, this has been amazing. For people who are inspired by this conversation, want to go deeper, want to, follow the path. I know you're working with Alana. We're about to go and have a workshop where, she's going to step on stage and share these transmissions that have come to me secondhand, first through her, that have really kind of inspired me and really opened me to this moment right now. And she's gotten so much from that. But where can other people, follow that similar path and dive deeper into your work and into working with you?
Yeah, so the easiest way to pop into my world is to pulse in with me through Instagram. Super active on there. I have tons of writing, free transmissions, ways for you to access more nuanced teachings within this work. And then if you wanted to go deeper, I have a membership where there are weekly transmissions, multiple live calls a month. It's called The Temple. And that is a great way at a super low price point to access my world. From there, I have other deeper dive immersions and even a mystery school called Union Template, where you can come and study the mythopoetic history of union and the deep truths of what it is to be a devotional woman in union, both throughout history and where we can take this and how we can cultivate change in the world moving forward. And of course, my one-on-one mentorship. So there are so many ways to tap into my world. Pulse in, see what resonates, and come say hi, introduce yourself if you come into my Instagram sphere.
Yeah, I love that. And hopefully there'll be a book being published by Chakaruna Books coming out with all these codes that we can work on together. So thank you so much for being here. I'm excited to be on stage with you here coming up. Actually, by the time this podcast releases, it will already have been done, but nonetheless, it is imminent for us. And thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure.
Thank you so much. My honor and my pleasure.
Absolutely. We love you guys, and we'll see you next week.
Thanks for tuning into this video. Make sure you hit subscribe. Follow me at Aubrey Marcus. Check out the Aubrey Marcus podcast, available everywhere. And leave a comment. Let me know if this video resonated or what else you would like to hear from me in the future. Thank you so much.